welcome back to Makeaway Life Coaching. My name is Sarah Abbott. I'm the life coach here. So we just finished our How We Love book series, and I hope you enjoyed learning about love styles. They are so important. I will be referencing forever those love styles. So if you missed it, go back and watch them or listen to them on the podcast. And I just really hope that it can be like a really strong foundation for you to help start to change your life in the way that you want it to change. Okay, so this next thing we're doing is, I guess, a series of basically like life coaching, education, and tools that we think would help you improve your life. So I'm gonna give you a brief introduction, and then we're gonna jump into what is, I think, the most important tool for your life in the world times 1 million. Okay, so first the introduction. What are we going to cover in the next couple of months? Well, lots of things. How to improve your life, how to improve your marriage, how to improve your family life if you have children, just all of it. It's going to be so great. One example of what we're going to talk about is feelings. It's kind of interesting because there really isn't any data on like what feelings are, where feelings come from. So we don't know for sure, but we do have like theories, and then some resonate more with me than others. So I'll just let you know my opinion on feelings is, we're going to go into this really in depth, but it's basically like something that comes up out of your soul. You don't have a choice over whether or not the feeling comes. You do have a choice over how you respond to it and react. You don't have to react to your feelings. Your feelings do not have to be the master of you. In fact, that is a mistake. We don't want our feelings to be the dictator of our lives, but you do have to feel them and just acknowledge them so that they can kind of flow up and out. I believe that's what they're meant to do. They're not meant to be trapped inside. One of the things that happens when we won't acknowledge our feelings, we don't like the feeling, we shame the feeling, and we shove it back down, is then now the feeling is trapped inside. And that can be something that leads to, depression, more crippling anxiety, is because you're not just letting the feeling come up, be acknowledged, and flow through you. So that's just like an example of what we're going to talk about with feelings, but we'll have a lot of tools on how to help you manage your feelings after you just flat out acknowledge them, which is the first step. Okay, another thing, self-care. I don't know about you, but gosh, that phrase bugs me. Everyone's like, oh, make sure you do your self-care. Well, we're going to talk about what self-care really is. You can call it soul care if that's less weird for you. If it's more weird, that's cool. Don't call it that. But I think it's going to be really powerful, because here is what I know about women. We have been sold a myth, and it's the myth of the superwoman. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was sold to us that you can work full-time, raise your children, be a wonderful wife, volunteer at the kids' school or church or whatever, and that you can do it all and you can have it all. Well, I don't believe that. I actually think, from my observations and my own life, I think that that is an absolute myth. I do not think there are enough hours in the day to be able to be all things for all people all of the time and have any room left for you to be your own self and to take care of yourself. And I actually think that's a really important thing, because you only have this one life. And if you're burning the candle at both ends, that is really hard on you. As I'm sure you know, a lot of you watching this or listening to this are exhausted, and that is where a lot of that exhaustion can come from. So we're going to talk about making different choices if you can. I understand not everybody can make different choices, but I believe a lot of women have more choices than they are willing to acknowledge. Not everyone, but a lot of people. So we're going to look at what choices you might have that you haven't explored, about how to have better balance in your life. That's my word for 2020. And it's a really important thing to have balance. In addition, we are going to talk about actual concrete self-care things that you can do to fill your well. I'm gonna go into that analogy more later when we start talking about self-care, but let me tell you this. Self-care is not having a glass or a bottle of wine at the end of the day. That is something I see on Facebook and Instagram as like the solution. That is not the solution. There are actual things you can do. It's different for everybody, but it's really important to have a list for yourself of actually healthy, soul-filling things you can do to take care of yourself that is not reliant on anyone else. You can always do it. You can always take care of yourself. That's what I call self-care. And I think it's really important. So that's another thing we're going to talk about. Another thing we're going to talk about is your marriage, and a lot of really cool information about that, how to repair it and make it the marriage that you want. You are not stuck. You might feel stuck, but you are not stuck. I'm going to promise you that. Another thing we're going to talk about is like being an intentional family. I have noticed our society has moved like completely away from the rituals and norms that we used to have. And a lot of what's broken down are these kind of intentional things we can do to build a more cohesive and connected family. So we're going to actually get into like really concrete things you can do with a family, like take vacations. Doesn't have to be super fancy. You can take a vacation for like $50 if you can borrow a tent from a friend. Okay, so we're going to talk about like being really intentional about building memories, building connections. Family meals around the table is old-fashioned, but it is where a lot of connection and healing happens, and a lot of other ideas. So that's just a glimpse of what we're going to be getting into. We're going to be talking about this stuff all spring. I hope that you come back because I actually think every single episode is going to be really life-giving for you. Cool. Today, we're going to start with a mini introduction to the most important tool in the world, in my opinion, which is called boundaries. Okay, when I went to therapy, I was raised in a pretty codependent family, which is really common. It's not bad, it just is what it is. And so when I went to therapy, my therapist was like, okay, well, I think we need to work on your boundaries. And I was like, cool, what's that? And she was like, trying to tell me what it was. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And she'd explain it more, and I was like, I think you're speaking Greek. Like, what is this thing called boundaries that you are telling me about? And it was so funny. I mean, it took me a long time to even understand the concept, because if you understand how the brain works, if you haven't experienced something, then your brain doesn't have a framework for understanding it. And so when you're learning about something new, which for me was boundaries, you're literally laying down, the neurons in your brain are laying down a new neuron pathway that is the framework for this new idea. It's hard work. It's tiring. Like when I left those therapy sessions, I was tired because my brain was like trying to understand the new thing called boundaries. I finally got it, which means there's hope for you, because man, if I could get it, anybody could get it. And now I feel like I'm the queen of boundaries. I don't think my husband would agree. That's okay. He gets his opinion. We don't have to argue. I think I'm the queen of boundaries, and here is what I will promise you. When you understand boundaries and you implement your boundaries in your life and you hold the boundaries, which is where most of the work is, you are free. You are free with all of your relationships. There is not one person in your life who can make you feel overwhelmed or intruded upon. That yucky feeling of like, wow, that person just came in and blew up my day. No. With boundaries, you can keep those people at a healthy distance of your choosing. You have all the power. And it is so amazing how that feels to know that you're free from negative, toxic people. And maybe those people are in your family, that's fine. So you might want to keep them around, but you have to keep them around in a way that's healthy for you and that protects you and your feelings and your soul. And that's what boundaries do. There's so much freedom. It's amazing. Some of you are like, oh, I got this. I'm really good at boundaries. That's true. But I hope you come back too, because here's what I know. It's rare to have healthy boundaries. It's very common to have boundaries that are way too strong, that actually push people away and keep them from connecting with you. That's not healthy. And it's it's more common to have no boundaries. But we're going to learn about the happy medium, the balance, which is healthy boundaries. And it starts with a really basic illustration that my therapist taught me. So thank you, Terry Haley. You gave me the gift of boundaries. And I'm going to go ahead, and this is just all we're going to learn about today. If you're like me and you don't have the neuron pathway, I'm just going to let you sit with this. The reason we're just giving this brief introduction, I want you to sit with this for the next week and let it percolate and let those neurons work and see if after a week this is like a concept that you can even understand. We'll be revisiting next week. So if you're like me, it's okay if you don't get it right away. Give yourself time and patience. It will come, because if it could come for me, it can come for anyone, I promise you. Okay, this is going to be our illustration about boundaries. It's very simple. Let's say that this is a fence, okay? Boundaries, one way to think about it is that it's an invisible fence that's meant to protect you and like your yard, which is you, your personal space, your feelings, your soul, okay? Your heart, your mind. This is an actual physical fence. And there's two houses. Here's house one. Here's house two. Now, if you were my life coaching client, you would be getting this. I do this with all my clients. And so I'm going to try to do it in a way online that's a little bit more generic. If you were my client, I would make you pick a specific person who like is a problem in your life because they constantly intrude on your life and your boundaries. But since, in your mind right now, think of who that person is. I'm going to put you here. Okay, you live here. This other person who we will call boundary less. Okay, so the guy's name is Les. He lives here. He's boundaryless less. All right, you live here, and this dude or lady who, again, take a minute and think about who in your family or life or boss or even children, who it is that could be living here who's like constantly in your business, okay? That person lives next door to you. I know, isn't that a dream? Okay, now you live here. Boundaryless Les has a giant coconut tree that is actually really pretty. But unfortunately, the coconut tree is constantly growing over the fence. And it grows bigger and bigger and bigger over the fence. And it has giant coconuts, of course. And what happens when Les over here doesn't have his tree properly trimmed, then his coconuts start smashing into your yard. Now, maybe that at first you think, okay, that's no big deal. Here's the problem. You are a flower farmer. You have a beautiful yard, and you like to grow, let's say, sunflowers. Okay, oh gosh, my sunflowers are not so good. So you are a sunflower farmer, and you love to grow, and you grow them like all over your yard. Every Saturday you go to the farmer's market and you sell them for huge amounts of money. You have a huge sunflower following, and you use it to pay for, let's say, your kids' school tuition. So it's really important money for you, okay? And you grow them year round. Now, unfortunately, it's been a while since Les had his tree trimmed. So his coconuts are smashing your flowers. And you're like, what the heck? They're even smashing your roof, which is not good because you have those cute little Spanish tiles that can crack when a giant coconut smashes them. And that costs you money in roof repair. So, what's the first thing you do? Most of us would walk right over. Knock, knock, knock. Les answers the door. Hey, Les. We're talking to Les. So, Les, I don't know if you noticed, but your coconut trees, it's growing over my fence again, and you know how important my sunflowers are to me, and it is smashing not only my roof tiles, which I've already had to have repaired, but it's also smashing my flowers. So, would you mind having that trimmed for me? And Les is all, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, totally. Or maybe Les doesn't even apologize. He's like, okay, I'll do it. And you go home and you're like, yay, that's going to be solved. Fast forward 2 weeks. More coconuts are dropping on your roof and your flowers. And Les hasn't had that tree trimmer out. So what do you do now? We're still going to go to Les, aren't we? So let's go next door. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, Les. You're a little less chipper this time. You mentioned you were going to have that tree trimmed and you haven't done it. It's been 2 weeks and I've lost like 10 more flowers and 2 more roof tiles. And it's starting to really cost me a lot of money, man. Are you going to be able to have that done? Oh, yeah, he says. Like, yeah, I'll do it. You go home and you're like, is he going to do it or not? Like, I don't know. Doesn't feel like he's going to do it. He hasn't done it yet. 2 weeks later, boom, boom, the tree's gotten bigger and it's dropping just so many coconuts. And you're having the roof guy come out over and over and over and your flowers are being demolished and you're thinking, oh gosh, maybe I'll just plant all my flowers on the right side of my yard to protect them. But you're like, that's not fair. It's my yard. And if I only grow them on the right side, that's not enough flowers for me to be able to pay for Susie's tuition. So, gosh, I feel so frustrated. Why won't he do this? Okay, so now let's take a minute and ask yourself, what would you do next? Your answer here indicates how, like, do you even have boundaries? It's okay if you don't. I didn't for a long time, most of my life. So if you don't have boundaries, then you might just keep asking Les to help you, like thinking he needs to change to solve my problem. If you have better boundaries, you might just think, okay, I guess I'll just plant on the right side even though it cuts my income in half. You're like settling. You're kind of selling yourself out, but it is kind of like a boundary because you're like, I'm tired of asking Les for help. I'm not a beggar, right? You're like, feel super frustrated by needing anything from him. So you're like, I'll take care of it myself, which is boundaries. But your boundary solution is really hurting yourself because now you're only making half the amount of money. So now we're looking at like, what would be the healthiest, super great boundary? Here's the thing. If this is a physical fence that's dividing your yard, in real life, you have a boundary is an invisible fence that protects you. Okay, like I said earlier, it protects your feelings, your heart, your mind, your personal space, all these really important things. Your very essence, that's what it protects. So in this case, that is represented by a physical fence, but in reality, they're invisible. So what can we do here to keep the coconuts out of your yard without needing anything from Les? Because here's the thing about boundaries. Your boundary cannot require a single thing from anyone else. That's where your freedom is. It doesn't require your spouse or parent or boss or friend to do anything. They don't have to change. You change. That's why it's powerful. So how could we get the coconuts out of our yard without needing Les to trim a tree? Some people think we'll go cut the tree down. If you're going to cut the tree down, that is an indicator that you lack boundaries because that's actually imposing on his boundaries in his yard. So what's another solution? Well, the perfect solution is this. I got a Sharpie here because it's so important that you understand it. The best thing for you to do would be to have a net hung. I'm drawing a net here. You guys can tell I'm a really great artist. Okay. The net would go between the coconut tree and your yard. It's kind of expensive, okay? But so was roof repair and losing flowers. So at least now the money you're spending is protecting you, so you don't have to keep wasting the money on these like dead things. You build this net so that when the coconut falls, it bounces it back into Les's yard. Maybe it hits his roof. Maybe it kills his yard. Maybe those things will help motivate him to change, maybe not. You don't care anymore because less is no longer your problem. You have devised a healthy boundary way to protect your yard. And that is what this series about boundaries is going to be. It's going to be how you can have healthy boundaries that protect you from anyone all the time. It's so powerful and life-changing, you guys. Okay, so here's the important things about this boundary. I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. Number one, it doesn't require Les to change. He doesn't have to trim his tree. Nothing. You take the power to have your own boundary and protect your own yard in a way that requires nothing of Les. I cannot emphasize that enough. Number two, you're respecting his boundaries. You didn't go in and chop the tree down in the middle of the night, even though you might have been tempted. You left his yard alone. Now, yes, coconut trees are bouncing into his yard, but that is his choice. If his coconuts weren't bouncing into your net, they wouldn't be bouncing back into his yard. So he now has to make a choice by his own yard, but you don't need to change anything. That's so powerful. And the reason you know it's a healthy boundary is because you don't need Les to change. You have all the power to make your own choices, and your yard is safe. The sun can get through the net. Your flowers are now growing in abundance. Your roof is protected. You feel free. And that is the gift of the boundary. Okay? So that's our boundaries illustration. Obviously, I'm not the best artist in the world. And obviously, this turns out pretty messy. And it might even be hard for you to see if you're here on the YouTube channel. So if you're on the YouTube channel or if you're on the podcast and you can't even see it anyway, I want to assure you that the illustration of the coconut tree boundaries is going to be available on my website, makeawaylifecoaching.com, on the blog. So if you go to makeawaylifecoaching.com, there's a little blog section, and I'm going to have an illustration. That is where our show notes are. So look for it there if you'd like to see it in a little better form. So think about this for a week. We will be back here next Thursday. We're going to be jumping in deeper on this illustration. If you don't understand the illustration, like I didn't for a good solid month with my therapist, I just didn't have the neuron, pathways for it. Go ahead and leave me a comment on the YouTube page or on the Anchor podcast, and I will get back to you to try to help you really understand this information before we move on. Okay? Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a really great rest of your week and weekend, and we'll see you here next week. Take care.